All right, we are in the Life of Christ, the Institute class, and we are in lesson 10. We kind of covered a little bit this last time, dealing with Matthew chapter 14, starting at verse number 13, and that's the feeding of the 5,000. Now, remember what's going on here. Jesus just heard about John the Baptist dying, and he was beheaded, and it says that he wanted to get alone. Now, we covered a little bit this last time. He tries to get alone, so he gets into a ship and tries to find a place where he can pray and be alone and talk to his father. And when that happened, it says, starting at verse 13, and when Jesus heard of it, he departed thence by ship into a desert place apart, because he wants to get alone and pray. But it says, um, and when the people had heard thereof, they followed him on foot out of the cities. So understand what we're saying here is that Jesus wants to be alone. And instead of just walking along the coast or going out into the woods, he takes a boat and goes off to try to get alone. And people follow him along the coastline and seeing where he's going to come to shore. And so he comes to shore, and here's this multitude that followed him. He can't be alone now, and he's surrounded by a whole bunch of people, and he had compassion on them and began to heal them. And it says that he, gave healed the sick, gave sight to the blind, took care of those of palsy, and he's there showing compassion. Now it's gone on into the afternoon, and they're hungry. People are out way farther away from the city than they expected, and the disciples are like, "What are we going to do? We need to feed these people." And he gets this opportunity to talk to them about, you feed them, you give them food. And they had 5 loaves, couple, two fish. And out of that, you see in the scriptures that God was able to multiply. Jesus multiplied so much that everyone got to eat. They said it was 5,000 men, not mentioning women and children. So this could be up to 10, 15, 20,000 people. I have 6 children. So if you think about it, if my wife and my family are there, that's 8. If you just counted me, that's 1. So think about some people having, let's just say, 1 child, but their wife was there. 5,000 men plus their wives, that's 10,000. If each one just had 1 kid, that's 15,000 people that are going to be fed from 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. That's pretty amazing. It just shows you the hand of God. Now, what I want you to recognize is after he feeds them, they have 12 baskets left over, so more than what they started with. And then he says, and straightway Jesus constrained his disciples to get into a ship and go before him to the other side. So he's urging them, listen, I spent all day trying to get alone, trying to be by myself because I got some bad news. But then the ministry got in the way, and I began to heal people, give sight to the blind, feeding the 5,000 up to 20,000 people. Can you please just go over to the other side so I can be alone? And so after he says that to his disciples and sends the multitudes away, then it says in verse 23, and when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up into a mountain apart to pray. And when it was evening, he was there alone. So I want you to understand from a Christian point of view, there are times when you make plans on what you want to do throughout the day. But then people, kind of, I don't want to say get in the way, but then life happens and you show compassion on people who come throughout the day, things you didn't plan. You planned on going to the store, but some people called up and said, "Hey, can you come by? We really need your help. I need someone to talk to. My marriage is struggling. We're struggling with our kids. We just lost our job. Can you come talk to us?" And that is what it means to be a Christian. You have a day planned and other things could get in the way, and you minister to the multitudes. You minister to the people. And now the day is over. It's the evening, and finally, Jesus gets alone to pray. Now, Jesus could have said, I tried to pray, Lord. I tried to pray. I tried to go to you and grieve to you about what happened to John the Baptist, but he didn't find excuses. After the entire day was over, so morning, afternoon, and evening, he then sends his disciples away. He sends the multitude away and gets alone with God to pray. Now, if the evening was, let's just say, 6, 7, or 8, because it's in the evening. It then says, and in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went unto them walking on the sea. The fourth watch is between 3 and 6. So that means that Jesus was praying for about anywhere from 5 to 10 hours. He was praying, okay, somewhere in between there. He started out to want to pray, but now it's at the evening and he finds time to pray for 5 hours. Now, I don't know about you, but after a long day of work, of doing all sorts of things, and I'm really exhausted, it would be very difficult for me to pray for 5 hours and not sleep that night. Yet Jesus is showing us that it's more important to have a spiritual nourishment of prayer and in time with God than rest of your physical bodies. I'm pretty amazed that this happens here. And then we know the story. Jesus walks on water, Peter comes out, and then Peter begins to sink because we always say he takes his eyes off of Jesus. What we're really saying is his faith changed from being focused on Christ to being focused on other things, and that's what caused him to sink. Remember, what kept him up was his faith. We always want to say Jesus was what helping him walking on water, but the reason why there's some fallacy in that is Jesus allowing him to walk on water and then he begins to sink makes it seem like somehow Jesus got weak. But Jesus doesn't get weak, he's God. So what allowed him to walk on the water was the faith he had in Christ, and what made him sink was the lack of faith he had in Christ. The same thing is with us. We can do all things through Christ, which strengthens us, right? And if we fail to do it, it's not that God got weak, it's that our faith was somehow distracted or weak. So after John the Baptist is beheaded, there's the feeding of the 5,000. Then we have Jesus walking on water, Peter coming out to him, and we see the thing where he cries, "Lord, please help me," and immediately Jesus Christ reaches out and helps him. And so these are the events that is in order of lesson 10, like we've been talking about. And when you get to the next lesson, lesson 11, we go from feeding the 5,000 to feeding the 4,000. Now, these are two separate events. Number one is in the spring, one is in the fall. The other one is the disciples mentioned first in the 5,000. The 4,000, Jesus talks first. We see the number of the loaves are different and the number of the fish are different. And the number of the people obviously are different. One's 5,000 men and the other one is 4,000. And um, you have to ask yourself, why would this miracle of feeding 5,000, maybe 20,000 people, and then feeding 4,000, maybe 8,000 people, why were there two different events of this taking place? I think this is unique because in later passage, Jesus says, beware the leaven of the Pharisees, and he talks about, their life, and he basically, they thought, oh, well, we didn't bring bread, so somehow, he's mad because we're going to go hungry. And Jesus, knowing their heart, says, listen, didn't I not just feed 5,000, feed 4,000, and you forgot so quickly that food is not a big deal. I can feed people. What I'm saying is, watch out for the doctrine of the Pharisees. I'm trying to get you to understand my parables. And they're like, oh, that's what's going on. Jesus fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. He fed 4,000, and we're just talking about guys. There's probably girls and children there too, okay, with, 7 loaves and a few fish. So he's using bread and fish, which are great pictures of Christ, by the way, which we're not going to get into now. But he does both of these, and still, when they forgot food, they thought, oh, we're going to go hungry. They didn't get it. Now ask yourself this. When God has answered your prayer, you're a Christian and you can say, Pastor Aaron, I have had times where God truly answered my prayer. Now, if that's you, that's fantastic. But then afterwards, there's times when we doubt or we forget about what he did. We can blame the disciples, but we do the same thing. And so you see the feeding of the 5,000. First, we should notice that Jesus was concerned about the people. He knew their need. And though he was trying to teach them practical, spiritual truths, he was also trying to show them practical truth. So he took care of them physically as well as spiritually when he taught them. Jesus took what was available, regardless of how little or how much. Now, he didn't use pies, he didn't use pickles, he didn't use olives to feed the 5,000 and the 4,000. He used fish and bread because that's what they had. Um, think about your life. When you see God do miracles in your life, and you're like, well, he used maybe a family member to help pay our bills or someone else, he uses what's around you. Okay, he doesn't have to create something out of nothing, though he could. He uses what's around him, and we should kind of take that to heart, that we should try to trust in God by using things around us as well. And right after that, we have a situation where he's crossing the Sea of Galilee in Matthew chapter 15, verse 39. And so it talks about, and he sent the multitudes away and took a ship and came into the coast of Magdala. Okay, and so he's coming to this coast after feeding the 4,000, which was different than the 5,000, because with the 5,000, what did he do? He got alone to pray. Now, these two cities that are mentioned here in our passage of Matthew chapter 15 are along the seacoast and also near, to each other. And Matthew and Mark both record this incident as being close to one city, which is Dalmutha, and the other one is Magdala, and they're kind of right next to each other. So one saying he was at one city, one saying he's at another city. It's not a contradiction, just for those who were wondering. And when you get to this point, guess who decides to show up? The Pharisees. They have nothing better to do than to come to Jesus, who they don't believe in, and cause issues. And the Pharisees want to seek a sign. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees came tempting Jesus. They want to try to trick him. And they said, we seek a sign. And so in 16:1, it says, the Pharisees also, with the Sadducees, came tempting him. Pharisees and Sadducees don't get along. It's like Republicans and Democrats. That there's something intrinsically separated them. That if I just said, "Hey, I'm a Republican," and you're a Democrat, you don't want to believe anything I say. Or if you say you're a Democrat and I'm a Republican, I don't want to believe anything you say. For whatever reason, just by saying that phrase has caused you to be biased towards the other person. The same thing is with being called a Pharisee or a Sadducee. If you're a Pharisee, you believe in the resurrection. If you're a Sadducee, you don't believe in a resurrection. So you guys don't get along because you doctrinally don't agree. Yet they get along here because they have a common enemy. Just happens to be the Son of God. And they gather themselves to tempt Jesus. And Jesus, he says, an answer, it says, when the evening has come, ye say, it is fair weather, and the sky is red. And in the morning, it is foul weather today, and the sky is red and lowering. O ye hypocrites, you can discern the face of the sky, but you can't discern the signs of the times. There is something about looking at the weather where they would say, um, red sky at night, sailors delight. Red sky in morning, sailors take warning. There was something to that where the sailors knew whether it be good weather or bad weather. And for whatever reason, Jesus was comparing this to say, you can know the signs of the times. You guys are convinced about certain signs that happen and you know what kind of weather it is. Even though it doesn't always happen, you're convinced. Why is it that you don't know the signs of the scriptures? And so their request actually was an evil one because they didn't need to know. They didn't want him to be able to do it, and they wouldn't use any sign to glorify God, even if he did. And so he mentions, well, the only sign I have for you is the prophet Jonah. And that idea was Jonah was swallowed up and for 3 days and 3 nights was in the belly of the whale. And Jesus Christ would be in the belly of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. So as you walk along this, you're following feeding of the 5,000, amazing. Walking on water, amazing. And then feeding 4,000, amazing. You're seeing these events happen over and over and over again. And then instead of them saying, wow, he is an amazing person, we should get to know him, they come tempting him. They want to get him to fall. They don't want him to succeed. They want him to fail. Some people are just like that. You could have truth, you could have humility, you could have righteousness, but people still want you to fail because it's not them getting the glory. And then we get in Mark chapter 8, verse 22, the blind man healed at Bethsaida, east of the Sea of Galilee. And what you see is that there was no reason for this man to be healed. All right, he's humanly speaking, it's a hopeless cause. And what Jesus does is the guy comes, he spits, and rubs it on his eyes, and he says, "What do you see?" And he says, "I see men like trees." And then he does it again, and then he sees clearly, and he says, "Go on your way. Don't tell anyone you're healed. Just keep it to yourself because it can cause issues." I think there's something interesting about this. I can't prove it. I want you guys just to think about it, but there's something interesting about Jesus Christ spitting on the eyes and then putting his hands upon him and asked him what he saw. And the first thing he saw was trees walking, and almost had to do it again to fix the problem, and then he could see clearly. Now, Jesus is God. There was time Jesus didn't even spit on people's eyes or make spittle in the clay. He just said, "Go your way, your servant is going to be healed," or "Thy faith has cured your servant, thy faith has made thee whole." And he doesn't even touch them. He doesn't even one touched the hem of his garment and was made healed. Okay, the lady with the 12 years of the issue of blood. So I think there's something to this, that he heals them, but the first time he heals them, it's not perfect. He sees trees and he has to do it again. Now, I don't know exactly what it is. God doesn't do anything by accident. So if there's some study, you should kind of look into it and say, why did God do it this way? I mean, remember Abraham when he says, "Take your son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and give him for a sacrifice at Mount Moriah." And in the thicket, the ram was caught and was able to be used for a sacrifice. And on that same mountain is the same mountain that Jesus Christ was offered also. So Abraham almost offered his son on that mountain, and God did offer his son on that mountain. And it's not coincidence. It's not by accident. This is something that God did. So I wonder why he spit and saw trees, and then afterwards he did it again, and then he was able to be made new. Okay, so these events are taking place. You're seeing these miracles, which brings you to Matthew 16, where Jesus Christ is going to withdraw himself in Caesarea Philippi to teach his disciples. All right, so in 16:13, if I can just read here, it says, "And when Jesus came into the coast of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, saying, 'Whom do men say that I am?'" Now, they answered, they said, "Some say Elisha, some Elijah, some, Jeremiah, some say, John the Baptist, alive again, or whatever." But then Jesus says, "Well, whom do you say that I am?" And it says that Peter speaks up and says, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And he says, "Blessed art thou, Simon Barjona, for flesh and blood hath not revealed it unto thee, but my Father which is in heaven." A couple of things that I want you to get out of this is, number one, this is a great question. Okay, to figure out where your disciples are, he says, "Hey, who do others say that I am? I want to see what you've been doing." And they answer honestly. Some say this, some say this. And then he pauses and uses that as a springboard. "Who do you say that I am?" And then you got Peter speaking. "Thou art the Christ, the Son of God." He didn't do this in front of a crowd. He did this when they got alone. It is said, actually, as a quote, "If you don't come apart from others, you will come apart." You know, um, and the idea is, if you don't separate yourself physically from other people, um, you will hurt your relationship with others. And Jesus breaks away from the multitudes and gets the disciples away from the multitude to teach them specifically what they need to know. And this is good because when you withdraw from the crowds, the Lord could instruct his disciples and get them more refined on the teachings that they're going to be responsible for when he leaves. And so after this answer, he says, Peter, you didn't get this because you're so smart and you know everything. My Father delivered this answer to you. Now, as soon as this happens, um, you see he talks about the keys of the kingdom, and I always get worked up when people say it's Peter who got this, and it's been misappropriated to suggest that Peter had the power to determine who could be saved. That is incorrect. Peter means a stone; it doesn't mean rock. Okay, so when he says, "Upon this rock I will build my church," and the rock he's talking about is the gospel that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Jesus Christ is the rock, and upon the rock of Jesus Christ, he will build the church. Not Peter. Peter's not the rock. Um, and he talks about giving the kingdom of heaven. And the reason why he's saying this is the gospel, the same gospel we have. We have the keys of the kingdom also. The keys are if you give the gospel, okay, to someone and they receive Jesus Christ, they will enter into the kingdom. And that is what he's saying here. Okay, what you just declared was, I am the Christ, the anointed one, the Son of God. And upon that truth, we are going to build what we call the church. And the keys to this kingdom to go in is the gospel by which I will die on the cross for the sins of the whole world. That's why the very next verses from 21 to 23 is that he says, and at that time forth began Jesus to show his disciples that he would go into Jerusalem, suffer many things, and the chief priests and the scribes would kill him, and on the third day he would rise again. Why would he say that? Because that is what is needed to get into the kingdom. Jesus Christ is the rock. He's going to die, shed his blood for the sins of the whole world. He's going to rise again to get victory over sin and death. And then anyone who declares him as Savior gets to enter into that kingdom. Not just the Jews, not just the Gentiles, but anyone can be able to enter into the kingdom which is given by Christ. All right, and so that's why it's so important. Now, to let us know that Peter is not the focus here, that he had a good praise. My Father delivered this to you. And that's why you were able to say what you had said, so I can tell people about the kingdom. And then, just in case there's a group of people who think Peter is the focus, that somehow he's the Messiah or somehow he's the one with the keys to salvation, in verse 22 it says, Then Peter took him and began to rebuke Jesus, saying, Be it far from thee, Lord, thou shalt not be unto thee. But Jesus turned unto Peter and said, Get thee behind me, Satan. Thou art an offense unto me. Okay. So in one situation, he says, Peter, you did great. My Father gave you these words to speak. And the other situation, he says, I'm rebuking you, Peter, because you're being used by the devil to try to discourage me. Both are talking about the people behind Peter, not Peter himself. Because it'd be really weird to think that in one verse he calls Peter the Messiah or the one who can lead people to Christ. In the next verse, he's calling him Satan, get thee behind me. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, I mean, if Peter is supposed to represent salvation or the keys to bring people into heaven, but at the same time he's representing Satan, which is cast to hell, that's a very weird doctrine. And unfortunately, a lot of Catholics and even Orthodox, believe in some really strange doctrines when it comes to Peter somehow having the keys and the ability to bring people into salvation in it of himself. When truly what he has, we have. The gospel of the kingdom, which is Jesus Christ dying and was buried and rose again. And if you call upon him, you can have everlasting life. Does that make sense? So that's the kingdom, just like us today. And so what we'll do is we'll pick up next time with the announcement of the crucifixion or the transfiguration, since Peter is rebuked by Christ. Um, we see something that is noteworthy, that in preaching about the cross, Jesus involved himself in predictive prophecy. He announced precisely where he would die in Jerusalem. He announced that the death would involve suffering and that he would rise from the grave 3 days later. That he included all those things as part of it. All right. So recognize that this must be been a huge shock to Peter's pride, who just recently had the right answer, and now he has the wrong answer. And that's something that we need to recognize. When we get something right, be careful not to be filled with pride, because if a man think he standeth, take heed lest he fall. And we'll pick up next time on the Transfiguration and lesson 12.